I may not have the longest track record of playing D&D or tabletop RPGs in general, but I've seen enough to realize something. Puzzles in D&D are often just not fun. They're the least enjoyable part of any session they appear in, and yet DMs, including myself, are compelled to keep putting them in. And I wanted to analyze why that is. Though probably I should start with a clarification. This is about puzzles specifically, not riddles, and not problems. What is a riddle I think everyone understands, but let me clarify the distinction between puzzles and problems, since I don't know if it's common knowledge or something more specific to game design. The shortest explanation possible is that problems are about finding a solution to them, while puzzles are about finding the solution. In other words, puzzles are much more restrictive in what you can do. This is of course a spectrum, and in a game so open as D&D, almost all puzzles will have some flexibility. A tiled floor where you have to find a specific path through is nice and all, but someone will try to jump, teleport, or fly over it. Which I think is a part of the problem, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's try and do this in an organized manner. Starting with my hypothesis as to why puzzles are often not as enjoyable as they could be. Then we'll look at some examples and analyze them to see how they match up against my claims. And then finally I'll give some suggestions as to what could be done to improve them. And if you'd ask me, most of the time the issue stems from the fact that you have to guess the mechanics and the solution at the same time. In puzzle games you get introduced to the mechanics in play, starting with very easy puzzles and go from there, slowly building up to the challenging ones. But of course, puzzle games have nothing but puzzles, so they're not really a fair comparison. Let's instead look at a game which was outright based on D&D, Knights of the Old Republic. This pair of games is in fact what inspired this video, as at one point I realized that I actually enjoyed solving puzzles there. Puzzles which range from combination locks with clues in the environment, through logic puzzles to straight up math. But what they all have in common is that the rules of them are clearly stated to you before the puzzle. Turn off all the switches, every switch toggles the ones next to it. Find the missing number in a sequence. Examine these 3 weapons to find which one matches the description. It makes it clear what you're supposed to do, leaving you to actually do it. Meanwhile, D&D puzzles often drop you into a puzzle that, though perhaps not too difficult, is the type meant to provide a challenge, not teach. And then you're given no instructions, or worse yet, unclear ones. Indeed, there are puzzles which do provide instructions, but they do so in the form of symbols or riddles, which effectively replace guessing the rules with another puzzle. Which has a potential to make it easier, sure, but it can also make things more frustrating, as you don't get any feedback that you got the first puzzle right, so you might move on to the second one with an incorrect assumption of how it works. Even if the meaning of these things would be obvious to you immediately, it doesn't mean that it will be for other people, and I can actually show my own mistake to present that point. This is Mole Galore, the first video game that I ever completed and released. The gameplay is simple. You can whack the moles that aren't hiding, and the ones that are hiding will pop out if you hit a mole next to it. The first few levels I designed to introduce the variety of moles with special properties, and I think they're doing a good job at this, except for this one. This level introduces the golden mole, which has to be hit a total of 3 times, as well as the idea that when a mole can be hit multiple times, you might want to double back instead of always moving in a new direction. The way I imagined it was that the player was probably going to get to that mole quickly on their first try, realize that this leaves you stuck with a few moles remaining on the top of the screen, and on the second try get these moles first to clear the level. The idea of clearing this part of the level leaves me stuck, so it must be the ending, was obvious to me. But I've seen a couple of people play through these early levels, and every last one of them got stuck there, seemingly failing to make that connection for quite a while. And that was a huge tangent, but all these examples are meant to show that knowing the range of things you can and cannot do is important, especially in a tabletop RPG, where you can try anything that is physically possible in universe, which is slightly more than a reasonable amount of options. And I'm sure that not wanting to fail is a factor at times too. Trial and error is a good way to learn, but it can be hard for some people when you have to tell your idea to another person with a good chance of them telling you that you are wrong in front of multiple other people. People hate being wrong, doubly so if there are other people aware of their failing. Then it can be even worse if there are in-game consequences of a failure. Ultimately, if the players aren't enjoying the puzzle, they will view it as a frustrating waste of their precious session time. So let's look at some puzzles and see if they show the problems I mentioned or if I don't know what I'm talking about. I was going to start with multiple examples of puzzles from official adventures, but they are stupidly difficult to find. And since the groups I play in do mostly homebrew adventures, there are only 2 that I ended up finding in a reasonable amount of time. The first one being the Elven Tomb in Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden, which appears as a part of a description of Lonelywood, and I will obviously spoil that specific puzzle now, so skip ahead if you care about that. In the middle of the gazebo sits an unlit stone brazier, its bowl 20 inches in diameter. The brazier is full of snow and pine needles that the winds have swept away from the gazebo's polished marble floor. Atop the eastern berm, a granite sarcophagus rests in a half-circle defined by 5 crystal pillars. Clearing the snow of the lid reveals an engraving of a brazier. You also notice a carving near the top of each pillar. From north to south, these images depict a twig, a pinecone, a flame, a feather, and a humanoid hand. This is probably as basic as a puzzle gets. In 2 sentences you get all the information. There are carvings of a brazier, twig, pinecone, feather, flame, and hand. All you have to do is literally put these things together. And the biggest question you players might have is if it will work if one of them sticks their hand into the flame. There isn't anything that this puzzle does wrong, but that's because it does very little in general. It really doesn't get simpler than find and combine things. And this is an optional puzzle with basically no stakes, as nothing happens if you get things wrong. So even if players somehow fail to figure it out, they can leave as soon as the guessing stops being fun. The second official puzzle I found in the Tomb of Annihilation adventure in Chapter 3, specifically the aptly named Puzzle Floor. And this one comes with a handout. A 10-foot wide hallway strikes off into the gloom. Carved tiles depicting various beasts decorate the hallway floor. Now, unless I missed something, this is one of those puzzles where the rules are not explained to you. It is also a floor tile puzzle, and as I've mentioned a while back, a tiled floor where you have to find a specific path through is nice and all, but someone will try to jump, teleport, or fly over it. What's more, in the case of this puzzle, the book actually states that using Spider Climb to move alongside the wall is a way to bypass it, and that you can completely eliminate the punishment for getting it wrong by succeeding on a low DC perception check, and then stuffing the holes that shoot poison darts with cloth or wax. The rules for this puzzle are that each of these tiles contains one of 8 animals, and you fail if you step on the same animal twice. And failing causes you and everyone around to be shot with poison darts. This isn't terrible, it gets the job done as a problem. There are many ways to progress, and figuring out the puzzle is only one of them. Which makes for a fine obstacle, but let's be honest, in a situation like this players will rarely choose to engage with the puzzle, so it might feel bad if you put work into designing it. If you want your players to actually have to solve the puzzle, tie it to a progression log. Make it so the door leading further in remains closed until the right sequence of tiles is stepped on. But if you're doing so, you should definitely state the rules, or at least allude to them. Perhaps an inscription of all beasts should share the load, carved out above the door or something like that. If that doesn't make sense to you, then perhaps the players can find that inscription in a journal of some previous explorer, or they catch it among the senseless ramblings of a madman which follows them. Up to you. Also, I'd say you should keep both the poison darts and an option to stuff the holes to prevent them from firing. This way the players get an opportunity to outsmart the puzzle without bypassing it. Oh, and instead of making this a corridor, turn this into a room with enough space around the tiles to make it easy to get back to the start and try again, since the goal changes to finding a proper path, not just getting to the other side. Worth noting that for this particular arrangement of tiles, one of the solutions is literally just a straight line. Which could make in-universe sense if whoever said this puzzle wanted an easy way to bypass it for the dungeon dwellers or something like that. It makes the puzzle quite easy once you understand the rules, but that's not necessarily bad. After all, players need to solve it to progress. But I've been watching a lot of playthroughs of puzzle games recently, and one thing that stood out to me was that In the best of them, there was often some extra challenge that made the puzzle harder, often one you don't know about until you solve the puzzle normally. So let's add something like that. One element of the puzzle I haven't yet mentioned are the Almirage tiles. A Detect Magic spell reveals an aura of abjuration magic around each Almirage tile. A creature that steps on an Almirage tile gains 2d10 temporary hit points. Once a tile has bestowed this benefit, it loses its magic until the next dawn. Casting Dispel Magic on a tile has the same effect. We could change it so it only gives the temporary hit points when it's stepped on as a part of a correct path, and after such a path is finished, it lights up or something like that. Actually, it would probably make sense to have it light up the moment it is stepped on as a part of a correct path, and then go out should the path be broken, instead of being finished. And perhaps as an additional indication that the puzzle has more to offer, you could have an inscription visible only once the first solution is found and the door opens. Perhaps one that continues the description of the original puzzle, something along the lines of, but each Almirage has its own path. Together they hide a secret. And I hope that you guessed that this additional goal is to find the correct path for each of the Almirage tiles, which will result in a secret passage, secret treasure, or any other optional but worthwhile reward. And yes, I checked, there are viable paths for every single Almirage tile, if we assume that you can move to any adjacent tile, including diagonals. Though since there are 8 rows and 8 types of tiles, the only movements that make sense are forward and diagonally forward. Of course, this still isn't foolproof at the end of the day, not without enforcing the rules. You have to decide if you want the players to make the puzzle easier by jumping or flying over tiles. Do you allow going to any tile in the next row, not just adjacent ones? What about skipping rows? And I managed to fill out a whole page with my ramblings about a puzzle that can be solved by walking in a straight line. Let's move on. Well, moving on was the initial idea. I have so much more stuff to talk about, but I've been trying to work on the script for a while with little success, so I'll split this into multiple parts. Thanks for watching, subscribe if you care to see the rest of this, and bye!